Hiya, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Leanne, and we're joined today by Sara Boyce, a mental health rights organizer for Participation and Practice of Rights Project. You can find them on pprproject.org. So Sarah's here to have a wee conversation with me after she gives a wee lead off, and a short video will be played. So Sarah, do you want to take it away?
Sure. How are you, Leanne? And hi to everybody listening in there. Thanks very much, first of all, for the invite to do this. I don't know what it's like in other parts of wherever people are tuning in from, but it's pretty warm here in Belfast. So I'm a bit hot, hot and sweaty up here in this small study, but I'll do my best. So yeah, as you said, Leanne, maybe just to explain where I'm coming from, first of all, in terms of our work, and then talk a bit about the mental health campaign. So I work as a campaign organizer with PPR, and PPR is the Participation and Practice of Rights Project. We're a human rights campaigning organisation based in Belfast, but we work across the island of Ireland, and we also work in Scotland, and we have links with particularly housing rights campaigners in both in the States and in South Africa. And our purpose really is to support, just put power into the hands, the power of human rights and the power of organising into the hands of people who need it most. So we support marginalised people to assert their rights in very practical ways and make real and lasting changes within their own communities. We support a range of campaigns, including asylum seekers, organising against the hostile environment, social security, and the austerity of the Tory government. We also have campaigns with organising people who are homeless and people waiting on housing. And the campaign that I work on is the mental health rights campaign. As you said, it's called the 123 GP campaign. And really it's a campaign for human rights compliant mental health care. That's what it is in a nutshell. And like all of our other campaigns, it's led by people with direct experience of the issues. And in this case, it's people with experience of mental health services and families who have been bereaved by suicide. So just to say what I'm going to talk about here this evening is really, it's grounded in their campaigning work and very much the hard-won lessons that have arisen from that campaigning. But the other thing to say is that obviously talking here, I mean, I'm conscious that, I'm talking to people that I haven't as yet. So in terms of pitching something, apologies if it's something that people are saying, well, we know that already, or like there's something different. It's kind of hard to pitch it, but hopefully it will be of interest to people. And the other thing, Leanne, is I'm really interested to hear from other people on this tonight, what their own thoughts are, or experiences, or activism around mental health as well. The term mental health we are finding increasingly sort of problematic, and I think it should be problematized, because it really it doesn't work, and it doesn't fit for what we're talking about. And that's some of what I'm going to say in the next few minutes. So I suppose just the context that we're in, I was asked to kind of talk around women and mental health and within the context of COVID. Up here in the north, the executive's slogan for us all is "We're all in this together." And that's sort of the rallying cry, and it's up on bus shelters and on signage around the place. We're all in this together, not because, yes, we're all at risk from the virus, obviously, and it doesn't discriminate in one sense, but it's certainly not impacting on everybody equally. And I think for some sectors of society, it's all their Christmases come at once. We've heard, probably people have heard the arch Tory Jacob Rees-Mogg talking to his investment firm clients, and he has basically said that the pandemic provides a chance to make super normal returns. And it's as barefaced as that. And he isn't wrong, because we know the corporations across the world, I think there's an estimate that they've made something like 434 billion in profits since lockdown. So people know this, that far from being the great equalizer, COVID has just laid bare of the stark inequalities in power, and it has exposed all of the deep pre-existing inequalities that were and piled more and more hardship and misery on people who were struggling. And I suppose in all of that, it's nowhere more evident than in the lives of women, particularly women who face multiple discrimination, intersectional discrimination. We see that the world over, from the United States to India to Africa, right across the globe. But I'm going to focus my own comments here on the situation I know best, which is here in the north of Ireland. It is the same picture everywhere, I think. I have a page here, so sorry about the rustling in between, but just to keep me on track. So COVID itself has obviously increased risk to women, to their physical and mental health, and to their safety and their very lives. We know the data shows that women are about a third more at risk of contracting COVID, although men are more likely to be hospitalised. But I think the bigger issue here is that the pandemic and the fallout from it has increased risk to women in many other ways on a much broader scale. So and I want to spend a minute or two just talking about the context, because I think that's just so critical when we're trying to understand, when we're talking about women and mental health, and what are the determinants and the factors around good and poor mental health as such. Before the pandemic, we know women were disproportionately represented in all of what they call at-risk categories, at risk of poverty, violence, discrimination, exploitation. They're overrepresented in low-paid, precarious work, as carers, within the mental health service users, and living in violent situations. Both north and south, we've seen temporary measures, emergency measures introduced by the governments, things like ban on evictions, providing accommodation for everybody who's homeless, meagre increases in social security payments, certainly here in the north, £20 extra. But if those limited measures, such as they are, aren't secured and made permanent, and additional protections, human rights protections introduced, we know the risks to women's health, mental health and physical health will just continue to increase. Just quickly looking at some of the data, I mean, women here in the north make up 70% of the health and social care staff, and 85% of our part-time workers are women. And they're the context that women are already being forced back into. We've seen it, that to get the economy back up and running, as they call it, putting women into very unsafe, risky situations, the risk to their physical health, but also the anxiety and stress in terms of their own health, but also worrying about their families and worrying about people that they care for who may be shielding, back at home, often without adequate PPE or proper safety measures. The other thing we've seen here during COVID is that there's been a huge increase in the number of carers, unpaid carers. So there was a survey last week, it was Carers Week here, 98,000 additional people became carers, and the vast majority of those are women. And one of the biggest worries when the survey was carried out, over 70% of women said their biggest worry was the impact that additional stress and burden was having on their mental health. There's a whole, right across, if we looked at all of the various aspects of women's lives, we know that the evidence is there, and the statistics, whether it's around childcare, women continue to be, doing all of the heavy lifting, and the burden of childcare falls to women. Homelessness, which will have the temporary measures, but it looks like with everything that will come out of COVID, there'll be an increase in homelessness. Over 50% of homeless households here in the north are made up of women, either lone parents or female-headed households. So as I say, we have these temporary measures that provide some protection, but the risk to people's mental health is when they're rolled back, which they already are being rolled back in England. If we look at domestic violence, again, we know that the existing power hierarchies within the home, violence within the home, we know that has worsened. Women's Aid have produced all of the evidence. So all of the prolonged quarantine and the economic stressors exacerbates the risk of violence for women and children. Here in the north, there's been a huge surge in the reported domestic violence incidents, and 4 women have actually been murdered by their partners. So it's as high as the rate for the whole of last year. And then finally, just looking at social security, absolute basic fundamental human right in terms of you're having an income to survive on, which is all that social security is. The policies that have been introduced by the Tory government and by our own executive here since 2010 onwards, they have impacted most on women. And the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Philip Alston, came in 2018, and that was his conclusion, that it's disproportionate impact on women. So the reason I'm sort of setting all that out, first of all, is that this is the context to women's lives, and this is what we would say is really, you cannot abstract, a person's mental health from the social and economic context of their life, the lived reality of their lives. But most of the time, the opposite is what happens with our mental health services. Mental health is seen as something that sits inside somebody's brain alone, in abstraction from every other aspect, the reality, the social and economic reality, and the systems and structures that are oppressive and discriminatory. So just want to, we look at where we're at here in terms of mental health in the north. People are probably aware, because there's been quite a bit of media coverage, we do have a mental health and suicide crisis here in the north of Ireland. Women are more likely than men to report signs of mental health problems, and there are different reasons for that we can talk about, but the response tends to be medication, and it's shocking to think that still the primary response is medication. We have a particular problem here in the north. It's everywhere, that the sort of over medicalization. But in the north, in terms of prescribing antidepressants, we have the highest rate of all OECD countries. If the northern state was taken as a separate jurisdiction, we would be at the top of that league. And shockingly, the prescribing of sort of tablets for mood and anxiety disorders was 66% higher for women than for men. So there's also, there are reasons for that, and it ties back to what I was talking about, the context. And then we have lots of other specific aspects to our context here, in terms of it being a society coming out of a very violent conflict, and the role of the state in that, but in terms of the impact on women as well. In terms of the state response, it's utterly and entirely inadequate. And I suppose the biggest thing is how mental health is framed and understood, which then feeds into the level of priority or lack of priority given to it. We have, in terms of our health budget, only 5.3% of our health budget is spent on mental health. I'm not sure down south, is it something closer to maybe 10? In England, it's between 11 and 12%. So we are lower than the UN global average, which is 7.3%. So we are actually below the global average for spend on mental health care. Our primary care system, which is where people go in the first instance when they're looking for help, it's not equipped to respond. GPs themselves acknowledge they are not trained in mental health care. They don't have the expertise. They also don't have the time within their 10-minute appointments. And yeah, fundamentally, I think the state's response here is predicated on a sort of biomedical model and understanding of mental health in that frame, and very much the psychiatric model, rather than one that's a psychosocial model. And probably the same as elsewhere in the island, working class communities are very much left to fend for themselves. The rates of suicide and mental ill health are over 3 times in working class communities. But what we see all the time is that it's unfunded grassroots groups that are left kind of carrying the burden of that and trying to provide the care and support that people in crisis need. And one of the concerns at the moment around that is that, in terms of the state response, the reaction to COVID, I mean, this is something, an existential crisis really that we're going through. And the worry is that people's very normal and understandable reactions to anxiety that isn't, triggered by that will be medicalized or pathologized in some way. And the only support that will be provided is more medication, because the levels of anxiety and grief through bereavement and loss, we haven't seen in our lifetime. So people need support, but they need it at a community level. and they need it in the ways I was talking about earlier. They need all of those inequalities to be tackled head on. They're the things that are going to cause stress and anxiety to people, not alone the worry about the virus itself. So just maybe spend a few minutes, if it's okay now, to talk about, I mean, that's sort of setting out, that's our context, and that's where, in terms of understanding around mental health, and the state's response. And I know I'm sort of just really scratching the surface on a lot of this and kind of sketching out in very broad brush strokes. But I think to talk then about the mental health campaign and the activists, first of all, like most grassroots campaigns that I've ever been involved in or seen, it's always women who are at the backbone of them. And it's the same with this, the 123 GP campaign. And the women who make it up and lead it, and there are some fantastic men involved in it as well, but the women really, some of them have been campaigning for 10, 12 years. And really, it's out of their own really horrendous experiences of pain and loss and distress. But they are determined to fight to ensure that other people don't go through it for themselves and their families. In many cases, it's too late because they have lost loved ones to suicide or premature death, connected with mental ill health. But the one thing that, talking to the people in the campaigns, that comes through all the time, there's a common sort of theme or thread, and that is power and abuse of power. And so much, I think, of emotional distress and suffering and trauma is linked back and connected to that. But what we've seen through people's experiences then, and what they talk about, is being re-traumatized through the state responses, state institutions and state processes, from the mental health services themselves, in terms of how the lack of understanding and any kind of respect and dignity once people enter that system, but also the social security system, which huge abuse of power for people. One woman said, the way I'm treated, she said, I'm not a client. People thought that I'm not a customer and I'm not a criminal, but these are the ways that the social security system makes her feel, that they've stripped her of her sense of being a human being with dignity. But on the positive side, the campaign really in the last number of years, they've built a really powerful campaign, which has gained huge momentum and strength because they have engaged in very challenging direct action campaigning and organising. They've called on the Minister for Health to declare a public health emergency. That was pre-COVID, so things kind of changed fairly quickly. But in the run-up, in the weeks, or in the run-up to COVID and lockdown, we were on the streets and people were calling for a public health emergency around mental health and suicide. They wanted resources invested, but more than that, they wanted the government, not just the Minister for Health, to join up the dots between mental health, distress and trauma, and structural inequality and oppression. They wanted to shift the whole framework. So going back to just the issue of power, it's a constant in the campaigns, both looking at the power that the decision makers and state holds and naming that and recognizing that, but also then thinking for the women what's being really empowering for them in terms of their own mental and psychological well-being is taking their own power and finding ways to do that, even if they're in what seem very small ways or limited ways, having a bit of crack with it, being a bit subversive, turning things on their head. So just the big thing, I think, is going outside of the state's frame of reference, so not playing by their rules. So whatever rules of the game that the state think everybody is going to play by, what they've found increasingly is move outside of that. And that's where they really get a sense of reclaiming their power, and which people said this is really, really positive for people's mental health. And the second bit, I think, is doing it collectively. That people trying to take on the systems and the state individually, or it's absolutely killing, and it does, you know, it does kill people. But doing things collectively and getting strength and solidarity from each other, that's where people, you know, really have found the power. So I was going to just, if it's okay, Leanne, maybe ask Graham to show the wee video. I think it's just about 2 minutes. And if I can just quickly give a bit of a context, so people have a bit of, you'll probably get it when you're watching it. But this is a video of a flash mob where the mental health campaigners staged a flash mob at a board meeting of our public health agency back in December. So it's quite seasonal, as you'll hear. And it's important, I suppose, to say that it came on the back of about 3 years of campaigning and gathering evidence, lobbying, doing the research, having meetings with people in power around mental health services, and campaigners thinking we are getting ignored here. They are not taking us seriously. So we have to come at this in a different way. So that's kind of where this flash mob came from. So if we want to roll it there, Colette.
Alarm bells ringing everywhere. Suicide's a crisis here, do you really care? Oh, PHA, PHA, this is why we're here. Your target of 10% saves just 6 lives a year. You need to reinvest, and counselling is best. But people commit months for this, and it's costing them their lives. You need to act right now. We need to hear you say, one death is still too many, say it loud and clear. Oh, counselling, counselling can help to save lives. Waiting times are far too long, bring in targets now. Oh, counselling, counselling can help to save lives. Waiting times are far too long, bring in targets now. We've just come down from the meeting of the board meeting of the PHA, the 123GP campaign, and we went up there to sing that song. It was a flash mob, and they didn't expect us to be there. And the call that we put out was the Public Health Agency needs to declare an emergency now. Suicide is a crisis here. Alarm bells are ringing everywhere, across every single community in the north of Ireland. Everybody knows that, except the people up here and the other health agencies who have the power to do things to stop this crisis.
Oh, counselling, counselling, can help to save lives. Waiting times are far too long, bringing targets now!
Brilliant. Thanks so much for coming today, Sarah. Thanks so much for talking to us. And it's absolutely brilliant to have you on today. That was so informative and so many important points that you raised there. So I have so many questions, to be honest. If we could jump into a discussion, I don't even know which one to pick first. So I'm going to go for, in terms of organising a successful action, could you discuss with us the process that you go through to organise something that becomes successful? And if you have an example, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of it's the one. There's no easy answer to that, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about the one that people have just seen. Probably makes sense. I think one of the things we've learned is taking our time with it and not rushing into it for a number of different reasons. But one of them is that whatever we're doing, it needs to make sense, because things happen all the time and there's lots of opportunities that we could very quickly sort of do something in a bit of a reactive way and get people mobilized and do something. But I think what we've learned over time, the energy that takes, always connecting it to the impact. So we've over the years we've kind of spend more time talking things through, I think, and planning things, to see, well, if we do that, trying to kind of see ahead, almost you need to know what reaction you're looking for by your action, so that then you can know where you're going to go for the next step. So it's kind of getting them in the long grass, kind of that kind of a game. So that's part of it, I think, is being a bit more strategic and thoughtful about it. So that's one of the reasons that we take more time to plan things out, trying to figure out how power will respond, when we're doing an action. But the other bit of it, I suppose, is for people who are struggling, with their well-being and overall. And it's not ever just mental health; it's physical health as well. It's the whole holistic thing. People like all of us, have good times and good days and bad days. But it's kind of working with people to make sure that it can be really genuinely participative, so that everybody who wants to take part in the action can do so. But we need to make sure that things can't, if you're doing something that's kind of really confronting power, that's putting people in a position, maybe some people are well used to it, other people not so much, and that people are okay, and that we take care of everybody who's on the action with us, not in any kind of paternalistic way, but in terms of support and solidarity for each other. So we do, depends what we're doing, but some of what we're doing, we organize conferences and things like that, and it's all the more regular stuff. But some of the direct action stuff, we do need to pay attention to all of that as well. That everybody has something that they're happy with doing, and wherever they're in at the front of the barricade or at the further back, that people feel okay. So we would scope things out a lot. And the other thing is just trying always to come up with something that the media, it's very hard to get coverage, as in terms of stuff like this, but trying to come up with actions and ideas that come from left field. And I think it's that thing I was saying earlier about taking the power away. If we do, and we've done these, lots of them, the predictable thing, we can throw up and get a banner and get a few dozen people outside one of the buildings, the Department of Health, and have a protest, and hand in a letter, or have a megaphone, and that's all good and fine. But in terms of impact, it's getting, over the years, it's just easier and easier for them to brush that off. Whereas the thing people saw with the flash mob, I think that left the campaigners and the activists on a high. And probably the main reason it left them on a high was the reaction of power. Power did not see that coming. The people around that table in the boardroom were totally taken aback, to the extent that the chairperson let us all start and finish the song. We had sort of thought about different scenarios unfolding and what we do, but we knew exactly what we were doing going in there. We'd done a lot of preparation. We'd gone down and sussed out the place. It was all fairly innocuous, really, of singing a carol, a Christmas carol at the end of the day, and we were there for 10 minutes, but we still wanted to make sure it was going to go to plan. But it was the reaction of the board members that gave power. The campaigners came away feeling really positive and really empowered by it, and it built on to a positive thing for the next action, because people got strength out of it. As we were leaving the room, the chairperson, I don't think it was on the piece there, but the chairperson started shouting like somebody in the Westminster in the House of Commons, "Order, order!" Which was completely just ridiculous. It was kind of whistling in the wind, but it gave people a laugh. If you can do actions as well, I think that can give people a laugh, I suppose. Sorry, here, Leanne, but the other bit for us in that was trying to use it to always build momentum with the campaign and bring people. So putting it out in a way that people, so when we came down from upstairs, I think it was in the video clip, we had maybe, 60, 70, 80 people outside in solidarity and support, and broadening it out so it becomes more of a movement, and that, as I said earlier, people can take part in different ways. Not everyone wanted to go upstairs and into the boardroom, but that we had a whole thing wrapped around people as well outside, and just opening it up for people to take part. So
absolutely brilliant answer. Thanks so much for that. Beautifully said, really. A lot there. when you were talking there in your wee lead off, you were talking about one of the parts that really stuck out to me was one, the funding cuts. I think you said mental health only has 5.3% of the budget, and the other one was obviously women as carers. And I believe you said that 98,000, if I'm correct,
Yeah.
new carers have arisen during COVID. So my question, I suppose, I have a few ones just in relation to that. So do you think that the funding cuts in healthcare impacted women's access to care, and how have these cuts impacted women in their role as carers, do you think?
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, in terms of the funding cuts, and I suppose the thing for mental health is that it hasn't even, we haven't seen very overtly that the budget has been cut, because the budget since 2010 for mental health, we've tracked it back through FOI, has been 5.2 or 5.3% consistently in the last 10 years. So, in terms of mental health itself, there hasn't even been, and since COVID, we haven't seen any uplift at all. Pretty much every other sector they've injected money into as a kind of emergency measures. There hasn't been any money injected into mental health. So, and where we see it then, because this is the thing that the activists, why they're interested in it, and why they want to be able to see changes that actually are changes rather than policy changes. And that's why the budget obviously is so important. But where they see it then is in waiting lists. So at primary care, trying to get access to counselling. So, so many women that the activists talk to, and they've done the research and surveys, about half of them only get offered access to counselling when they go to their GP. But I think it was something like 94% said we would like to offer counselling rather than just medication if they go and say they're concerned about feeling anxious or depressed. So the waiting list for counselling, in some areas it's 7-8 months, depending on what part of the north you live in. Waiting list for mental health assessments, the longest I think is something like 1 year and 3 months. Excuse me, in one of the trusts. There are no perinatal, mental health inpatient facility for women here in the north. In England, I think there's 17 or 18 units, specialist units. It's something people have been campaigning for here for forever. They keep talking about a commitment to it, but we haven't seen it yet. There's a shortage of beds. The system isn't working at all, and people are rocking up at A&E feeling in crisis because they don't know where else to go. So definitely the budget is a joke, but it goes back to that thing I was saying earlier, that it's not just the budget for mental health, it's all of these other aspects, the I suppose the disinvestment in things like all of the supports that people are entitled to have around childcare, around caring within the home. Social security, yes, it's hit women the hardest, all of these funding cuts, and definitely in terms of unpaid care, which is right across the board. We know what they call love labor, that it's women who are doing that, and most of it is hidden, and these women never even get the chance to actually think about their own mental health because they just have to keep going pretty much 24/7. So that's a huge issue as well, in terms of the lack of care and support for carers who are primarily women.
Wow, so much there as well. Thanks so much for that. In terms of what you were touching on there about medication, I also found very interesting. And so what I'd like to ask you is that it seems that medication is prescribed more so than therapy. And I was wondering what types of problems arise from this situation, and why is medication the go-to treatment for medical professionals, and how do you think this issue can be addressed?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was saying earlier. That that's what the stats bear out, that it's medication. I suppose historically going back, it's again going back to how mental health is understood, and what it is, and how it's understood. And it was the dominance of psychiatry within mental health. Mental health has always been the poor relation, but we're not that far back, north or south, where people who had severe distress, and whether it's psychosis or were all locked up and hospitalized, and people would have talked about the mental hospital. So all of the stigma and people being locked away in the same way as other people with learning disabilities. So that's the kind of history and culture we're coming out of, but worldwide, where the people, because there was never any understanding of it. So then sort of the dominance of psychiatry, I think, and seeing it very much within the whole medical sphere as just, I think, the disconnectedness of people's emotions from other part, and deliberately the disconnection, and particularly for women then as well, in terms of the wisdom of women, I think, and we've seen that throughout history as well, in terms of demonization and witch hunts, all of that, because it didn't fit as a way of organizing around units of commodities, and on the production line, basically. So it's a whole other approach. So I think you could have a huge discussion about all of that. But you were asking then in terms of a different way. I mean, that's something we're interested in really exploring and finding out and learning from other people. We're running a series of webinars throughout July and August, and it'll be on our website, on PPR's website. But one of the things we're really interested in finding out is other ways of supporting people, understanding what's going on for people who are going through distress and have a trauma, but how do you support people through that, and to have a better life, and looking at things from other countries, like we're looking at in Africa, in Zimbabwe, where there are lots of community models, partly out of necessity, because they didn't have the psychiatrists and they didn't have the money, the budgets for medication. I mean, there's the whole pharma, industry, and their interests in this as well. But it's good to look, I think, at other cultures and other contexts where there isn't the extreme separation, I think, in terms of different systems and ecological systems and nature, where we're just, in terms of advanced capitalism, we're completely split off from all of that. So a lot of this is about disconnection. So it's looking at different approaches where it's a much more integrated, connected, holistic approach again, and where the power really is recognized within people and within communities, and as I said earlier, drawing on the wisdom of people and people's own, giving people their own power, I think. So models like that, we're really interested in moving away from the medicalization of these problems.
And when you say holistic, if you don't mind me asking, could you expand on that a little bit for me?
Yes, I suppose it's a term that you do hear bandied about a lot. It's both in lots of different ways, that people's mental health, which I started off saying, cannot be sort of abstracted from your physical health. Everything is connected. The head and the heart are connected. There's only that much space between 18 inches between the head and the heart, but it's that disconnection, I think, very deliberately by vested interests as well, but disconnection of people from themselves, first of all, in terms of internally within ourselves, in terms of our real honest thoughts and feelings, and from people's experiences, but disconnection within families and within communities. And we've seen how our economic system has very consciously done that increasingly. I think the disconnection from community is a huge one, and that's one of the upsides in COVID. People are realizing that we all are Scafakela, Warren Nadini, we all rely and depend on each other to survive and thrive. And then disconnection from nature, disconnection from our systems around us. It seems like everything is atomized, instead of seeing everything is connected. Bigger system, it's going to impact. So I think it's bringing some of that back in all way, even.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you're saying there. It's very much reminiscent of what you were saying earlier about getting away from the power structure that's already in place and finding the alternative way to do it through community organizing, and getting away from the capitalistic way that it's
Yeah,
done as
yeah,
well. So that's
yeah,
absolutely fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Um, in terms of communities that you were saying there, I do have a question. So I was wondering about if you could answer in what ways is it more difficult for people in marginalized communities to access treatment specific to their needs. So I've kind of noticed that, you know, it's a lot of out there when you go through the official kind of channels that there's a lot of like everyone gets a bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, even if that's not what you actually need. So I was wondering about, for example, people in the traveling community, you know, LGBTQ plus people, and you know, even, you know, survivors of domestic abuse, these kind of very specific things that can't just be broadly brushed with the same stroke. um so do you have any experience in working with marginalized communities you could speak of?
Yeah, and I mean, if you add class into that as well, you know, in terms of, I mean, it comes back to the thing about the power differentials and who has power. So if we're talking about traveller women or asylum seeking women, you know, in terms of how marginalised they are, and that whole thing about multiple, you know, levels of discrimination, um, there's a huge separation between our health system and the professionalization of our health system, and you know, the undermining of anybody except the experts. So there's, you know, you go to the expert in the white coat, but you leave your own, you know, you have to present yourself and leave any of your own sort of understanding or feeling or thought about what's going on for you outside the door almost, and you get they do it onto you. But yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of barriers for people in marginalised community, and I think particularly for women who always leave their own health to the last because they are in that role of caregiver always to everybody else in their family and their extended families. But one of the big barriers that we're seeing at the moment for in terms of a divide is the digital divide around accessing healthcare. We PPR started a campaign a number of weeks ago, and again, I'd encourage people to go on our website and have a look and see if you can in your own area support the campaign. And the campaign is around internet access for all as a human right, because it has been recognised as a human right. But why this is so important for healthcare is certainly in the north, I mean, and I think everywhere, they're moving a lot of healthcare. Is either it's been privatized, and you know, we've seen it with the NHS being dismantled, but we've seen it down south as well, you know, where they're paying 15 million a week to the private hospital beds, and they were saying this was fantastic that the private sector had handed over sort of out of the goodness of their hearts in terms of these beds. But then you hear it's 15 million. But so what's happening is the private sector are moving in. They see money to be made and profit to be made around mental health care as well, coming out of the pandemic. And yeah, you mentioned things like CBT. If you have, you know, a level of education and you have resources and access, you can access a lot of self-help. You can go online and you can access Headspace app or whatever it is you need, or you can buy healthcare privately, mental health care as well. But for poor people, working class people, people who are outside, people who don't have the language, people who don't have the digital literacy, but more importantly, don't have digital access. There's a huge digital divide. So that's what this campaign is around, is these are vital, it's a human right, but accessing vital essential services like mental health care as well. People are going to need digital access in order to do that. And we know the groups of people who are excluded from that. But you know, on the positive side, you know, it's gone back a while now. I worked in Dublin and worked with traveller women, and at that stage, you know, the women in the community were training up as primary healthcare workers themselves. And you know, I don't know where the model went, but it was fantastic because it was allowing within the community and recognizing, you know, the role of those women within their own community, and again the wisdom and experience of those women that they were bringing, and the trust, because it's a huge thing is around trust. So they weren't setting themselves apart from the community in the way that experts and professionals do. They were from part of the community, and these are the kind of models we're seeing in different parts of the world, like I was saying around Zimbabwe, and the friendship bench, which is, the elders and older women in the community, where people basically sit and have a talk, and if they're feeling troubled or distressed, so moving more into thinking about those kind of ways of supporting people.
Absolutely, that sounds like a great campaign. And you're right. I'd even forgotten that was passed as like a human right, the access to online, to the internet. And obviously, as you said there, that there are some groups who, it's much harder for them to get that. And I suppose immediately what comes to my mind is groups that you had mentioned earlier, which is homeless people and asylum seekers. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit with about your experience and kind of projects that you may have worked on with trying to tackle like the mental health system for them, which is obviously must be so difficult to access at all.
Yeah, and I think for people who are homeless, and this is right across the board, it's the first and foremost sort of barrier, and the constant barrier that people have is the lack of a stable home, a safe and secure place to call, that you can lay your head at night and feel safe and secure. So without, I mean, that's the most absolute basic fundamental right, and everything then stems from that. So, you can come at it from thinking, well, how do we provide mental health services to a population such as homeless people? But you can also, at the same time, I think, come at it and say, how do we ensure that people's basic human rights are being met? That it's much more than just mental health. And the campaign here with homeless people is called FDA No Delay, which is full duty applicant. So what people have been saying is that they're in homeless hostels, but they're not, from the housing executive, they're not getting the points that they are entitled to and that they need in order to be considered for housing. So they're sitting in hostels for years on very, very few points. And yet they're recognised as homeless, and they should be getting. So the campaign is FDA No Delay. But for people in that campaign, the trust, people come up against problems trying to get primary healthcare services to your GP with not having an address. It's the same for travellers. It's the same for asylum seekers. There's the added language barriers. There's huge stigma issues. But I think if you sort out the fundamentals, so many other things fall into place. What we will hear from government here is that, well, people who are homeless, they have so many things going on. Quite often they will have, not always, but problems around addictions as well. But what we're looking at is other places like Finland, where they have a housing first policy. So their policy is very clearly and overtly a human right to housing. You make sure everybody is housed and then supported. So you provide the wraparound instead of doing it the other way, looking at it from the other end of the lens, which is what's happening here, is saying, well, people aren't ready to go into a house on their own or a flat. They wouldn't be able. They have too many problems. We're saying they have too many problems because they don't have a house. So if you sort out and support people to work, they need support, give them the support they need, then people's mental health will improve. I'm not saying in the meantime don't provide people with the mental health services, far from it, but it's going back to the thing we're saying, so much is online now. How are people living in homeless hostels who don't allow people access to internet? Asylum seekers and multi-occupancy houses, again, there's no internet or Wi-Fi provided. So how are people going to access these services, into the future? So I think it needs to be really a serious, approach. If we're serious, and if the trusts are serious, it's not just about tweaking their existing service and maybe having a mobile unit to go out and do a foot clinic every so often for people who are living on the streets. That's great. That we're not knocking that, but it has to be a much more fundamental, radical commitment. And as I was saying earlier, joining up the dots. If we're serious about help, their mental and physical health.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was. You're absolutely dead on there about so many things. Something that really comes to my mind, I suppose, and you touched on it a few times now, but when we're talking about just the homeless communities and um about COVID-19, and how, these people, they don't have access to any kind of PPE, and it's, we're living in a crazy time right now. I can only imagine what it's like to be a homeless person living through this time. So I was wondering if, like, have you seen a real big change since COVID hit in the kind of work that you're doing? And I just suppose how it's impacted people's mental health over the past, I think, 4 or 5 even months now.
Yeah. Leanne, just to say, we thing come up to say my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully it'll be okay, but it's one of the, just in case it goes belly up. Yeah, one of the things that we've noticed and that the campaigners themselves have been very much commenting on is pretty much overnight, because even though governments knew there was a pandemic coming for years and chose to ignore it very deliberately, stood down, particularly in the north here and across in London, stood down all of the pandemic planning. So it came to a lot of us out of the blue almost, and hit very quickly and very hard. It certainly didn't for government. Leaving that aside, the thing that struck a lot of people in the campaigns was how quickly the things that they were campaigning for years were done like that, almost overnight. So the people who are homeless on the streets of Belfast and other parts of the north, pretty much over a weekend, we saw it announced that there were no homeless people in Belfast. They had accommodated them all. Social Security, where we were seeing the types of assessments which are cruel and inhumane, the assessments for disability payments that people are being put through here. For years, campaigners have been saying, these are having a horrendous impact on people's mental health, and there's evidence in England that many people have taken their own lives because of those processes. But they suspended all those assessments. But up to that point, they were saying, we have to do these assessments. These private companies who are making 80 to 100 million pounds, they're being paid by government to do assessments. All along, they said, we have to. This is the only way we can determine people's entitlement and eligibility. Overnight, they're saying we don't need to do these because, right away, they're saying we were putting ourselves at risk. So they were suspended. Evictions were stopped. There was a small increase in Social Security payments. So they're just a few of the things. Removal and deportation of asylum seekers, destitute asylum seekers. All of these things overnight, suddenly, they kept saying there's no magic money tree, and almost 100 billion has been pumped in here. So we kept saying mental health, we're looking for a few million to improve counselling waiting lists. Can't be done. We'd have to take money from cancer patients. Is that what you want us to do? Which is literally what the Public Health Agency told some of the women when we went to a board meeting about 2 Septembers ago. They said, look, 2 million, we could clear the waiting lists. And they're saying we can't do that. Are you saying we should take money? Where do you want us to take it from? And then, so that's one of the things that we saw overnight, and campaigners very much commented on. So we know it's about political will. It's nothing else. It's about political will. The money is there. The money can be made, and things can happen. Solutions can be found. So that's been a big learning, I think, probably for everybody here tonight. The other thing is just the challenge then of mobilizing and campaigning in this way. I've mentioned the digital issue already, and that's a big part of it. But I think we're challenged with a lot of our campaigning and organizing is bringing people together. And it's that thing about the energy that people get from doing things collectively, and solidarity. And certainly Zoom doesn't allow or facilitate that. It's a very dead space, isn't it? It's there's just so much lost. I mean, it's great we can do it, and there are the upsides that you can bring people in from, we can connect literally all over the globe, and that's fantastic. But we're really looking at how do we, because this is where we're at for the foreseeable. We've seen a huge rush to go back, pushing people back out to get the economy up and running, as they call it. And certainly for us as an organisation, we're not going down that road, because we can't believe a thing. We know we can't believe a thing that the government says, and people are being put back into unsafe situations. So we know we're going to be operating like this for quite some time. So it's trying to figure out how, I suppose, how to be effective, and how do we still hold power to account using digital organising and campaigning. We are figuring it out. We have a new website called No One Left Behind, nlb.ie. So nooneleftbehind.ie. And that's worth people going and having a look at as well. We're looking at a lot of what's happened since COVID. So it's really the no one left behind, that, you know, any move out of this, it can only be, you know, the thing that, you know, no one's safe until everybody is safe. But from a human rights perspective, that all of the protections that people need and that we've seen were possible, that we need to secure them, that there can't be any rollback. And also we're very closely watching what's happening with privatisation, because this is a golden opportunity, as Jacob Rees-Mogg said, for people to move in there and make huge amounts of money right across. So that's something we're scrutinising and monitoring and trying to expose as well. So yeah, just it is, we're trying to figure out how we continue and build on our campaigns, and as I said, really hold power to account is the key bit.
Thank you so much for that. There was some absolutely great analysis in there, and I completely agree with this. And what you were saying at the start there about, you know, how COVID hit and then suddenly we can accommodate and shelter these people. And what you were saying there about, oh no, we can't, there's no magic money tree, and all you need was 2 million, and oh, well, we can't take it from cancer patients now, can we? And absolutely, and you could just see that it's, excuse me, but a load of bollocks. And you see that it's a class issue, you know, that, you know, like that there needs to be for capitalism to keep going, and for this like economic growth. And the whole reason that they're even opening everything back up is for the economy. And I just wanted to talk, I suppose, about something that you mentioned earlier in terms of what you were saying about that, like mental health and the way it's done through the actual system is an attack on the working class, whether it's through the continued privatization, as you were saying, or through, as you were saying earlier, the suicide bereavement kind of projects that you're holding, which, you know, I'm sure so many working class people, including myself, have need, you know, because the system is so against us. And I was just wondering if you could just let me know a little bit more about that. I know you had mentioned it in your wee lead off Jesus, ages ago, but just before we go.
About the which, Leanne, about the campaign itself or the project? What would you like me to talk about? I'm not 100%
sorry,
with you.
just
Sorry.
about the what you were saying earlier about the suicide bereavement that you have for people who need that. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little about that, and, you know, how many people do you know that make use of this facility, and, you know, is it a really widespread thing, or?
So we don't have a support project. I'm not sure, maybe I didn't explain it very clearly. We don't, in PPR or the campaign, we don't have a support group for families bereaved by suicide, but there are families who've had that experience, who've lost loved ones, who are members of the campaign and who have campaigned to get bereavement support put in place. Yeah. But some of our members, so we're across the north and we're a very loose network, the 123 GP campaign. So there are projects like up in Mid-Ulster and Draperstown in County Derry. There's a suicide prevention group there, a local grassroots community group that's unfunded, but they grew out in, I think, 2012. They literally, some women got together because there was a huge number of suicides over a short period of time. So they're involved in the campaign. There's another group down in Downpatrick in County Down, Suicide Down to Zero group. Again, a number of families coming together who had lost loved ones to suicide. So it still seems to be a lot of grassroots group campaign who are doing when things shut down at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and it's the weekends that obviously people find, harder in terms of people are really struggling. They're the people who are really stepping into the breach then and trying to support people.
Absolutely. Sorry for the misunderstanding there.
No.
But thanks so much for that information.
Yeah.
It's very good to know. Obviously it's something that affects us all, and I can only guess that during the last few months in this trying time, that even more so in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things you were saying, I don't know what other people's listening in terms of what people are seeing and their experience, but there is a bit of what I've seen called a kind of pandemic paradox. So we know that the volume of work that GPs are getting really sharply during COVID. People were at the start during lockdown were very afraid to go anywhere near their GP, but also people thought that all services were shut down. But there seems to be another thing going on as well alongside that, where people, everyone reacts differently, in terms of how we deal with things. But for some people, this has been obviously a welcome kind of a pausing and a slowdown in terms of people's lives. But there is a bit of a thing going on where people really, who you would expect, to be much more anxious, maybe who have experience of anxiety, it's the opposite has happened. That people who have anxiety all the time say, in fact, they're always in a state of high alert. They're waiting for something catastrophic to happen all the time. And now that it's sort of happened, they're kind of going, I told you so almost. They're okay with it. People are okay with that. But I think, on a more serious note, what we'll see, same as what happened here during the conflict, it was coming out the other end. So there's some resilience, or there's something that gets people through the actual, period of this and the lockdown and the high point of the crisis. And there's very much a pulling together. So there's a lot of community support and solidarity, and people are feeling that. But I think it's when we come out the other end, especially when we look at what's likely to happen around employment rates, and that's known to be a huge risk factor and stressor in relation to suicide particularly. So we know in terms of the likely impact in the next number of years. So I think that's when it's more likely to see and the need for services. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I suppose I want to bring it back to talk about women, and how throughout this conversation you've talked about these strong women and these strong working families who come together and to grassroots organize, and obviously the PPR project, and how you were saying that it's formed of these strong women who have had these kinds of things happen in their own lives, don't want it to happen to other people, who are carers, who've gone through their own mental health difficulties, who've seen family members go through mental health difficulties. And really what I wanted to ask you, as obviously one of these women who has clearly done so much, and is continuing to do so along with your colleagues, I was wondering what a personal goal is of yours in this kind of work. What would you like to see yourself, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to separate out, or be, in terms of what's a personal goal, and because so much of me is just bound up with work as well, But what I suppose, in thinking about over the last number of years, what I've seen and what would be great to see really building is more of a movement around mental health, because these women who've been doing this for so long, some of them quite often, you weren't talking about huge numbers or critical mass or momentum, but you're talking about maybe 4 or 6 women who kept the thing going when things were very tough. But I think what would really I would love to see is right across the north, and I think we have an opportunity now, or there's a possibility of it, because of the pandemic, and that much more widely across society, recognizing that, you know, this idea about mental health, and that it was only, you know, the very unfortunate, or, you know, most of us are okay, most of us get on, and we don't want to talk about mental health, that sense of it's not me, it's somebody else. And you know, people say, well, things can come to anybody's door, and that's true, yes. But it'd be great to see a whole shift in approach to all of our understanding around, you know, what our mental health and our well-being is, connected to everything we were talking about earlier around a different way of being almost. Yeah, and supporting people, I think, supporting people in all of us within communities. So for me, it's, yeah, I'd love to see this as an opportunity to build much stronger rooted communities with different priorities. But then mental health becomes something that we all go through periods of you know, our mental health's good, and, you know, the stressors, you know, these are the things that are going to impact on mental health. But I just think that for that to happen, we need a shift towards a much more equal society, fundamentally, you know, a different kind of society. But the thing, yeah, that I get most kind of, for me, my energy and that sustains, is seeing the people in the campaigns who are just incredible. You know, when you know what people have come through. But also, I think when you know, I think Ines McCormick, who set up PPR, and who was a trade union leader, first female president of ICTU, I think one of the ways she had of describing it, she said, when you see the glint in a woman's eye who thought she was a nobody and now realizes that she is a somebody. And it's that what I was saying about the meeting with the flash mob and the Public Health Agency. It's a bit of turning the tables, and realizing the power. Yes, those people have power, but we can and other people can take some power as well. And it doesn't often take a lot, you know, and you can go from there, I think. So yeah.
That was lovely. Thank you so much. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is amazing to know that in the kind of system that we're living in right now, that it's so oppressive, so exploitative, and that the organs for us to receive mental health treatment from, and I mean, how could you not have mental health difficulties when the whole system is shaped to cause that for you, you know? And it's just amazing to know that there are these grassroots organizations out there, that there are these communities who are striving to take the individualism out of it that is so prominent of, oh, well, that's in your own head and that's your own problem, and really working together to try and, you know, combat this. It's just so amazing to hear, and I've just enjoyed talking to you so much, and everything that you've had to say, it's really, really inspiring. And the whole, like, participation and practice of Rights Project is just sounds so inspiring. So I don't have any more questions. To be honest, I've learned so much from talking to you today, and I appreciate so much you coming on to speak with me. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Leanne, and it's been really great to get this opportunity to do it. Yeah. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're saying, that the lockdown and COVID has thrown up, that in terms of making connections, and I said it at the start, but just to say again, anybody listening in, just to encourage people, do go on our website, even if you look at, we've two, but if you look at the No One Left Behind, nlb.ie, we're on Twitter as well, and we're on Facebook. But we do genuinely want to connect in with people, because we want to find out what's happening in other places, because I think that's where the power is sharing of knowledge and experiences, and really building something, you know, quite organic, you know, almost invisibly. But so anybody, just go on our website and check us out, and give us a shout, or drop us a line, or follow us on Facebook or Twitter. So thank you very much, Leanne, and everybody.
Thanks everyone who's watching and listening, and thank you so much, Sarah, for all of that.
Great. Berbua. All the best.
Slán.
All right. Slán.